We are now going to hear from Irwin Garfinkel, who's one of the co-founders of the Center on Poverty and Social Policy.
Well, I know how to use this, I hope. And I hope I don't lose my voice. I've got a cough that I'm trying to keep at bay. So I'm going to talk about the benefits and costs of cutting child poverty. And to do that, I'm going to focus on a paper that looks at the benefits and costs of a child allowance. The reason for doing that is we enacted a child allowance for 1 year, and it cut child poverty in half. So it's very closely related. This benefit cost analysis was published in the Journal of Benefit Cost Analysis. It's a scientific endeavor that I won't go into the details of the science at all, but I want to explain to you in layman's terms how it's done. So the first thing you do is identify expected impacts of the policy, and it could be impacts on health, could be impacts on earnings, could be impacts on crime, could be impacts on low birth weight. All of those, in fact, we found literature that measure the effect of the policy on all of those outcomes. And I just mentioned a few. And I want to say that all of the outcomes begin with health. Begin with health, and you'll see in a moment that health, child health, is the single biggest benefit of increasing the incomes of low-income families. And child health is far and away the biggest benefit. There's also a small benefit for the parents' health, but the biggest benefit is child health. So the impacts begin at birth. Lower birth weight, fewer children are born with low birth weights. Fewer children will die in neonatal mortality. Those are small numbers relative to the children who survive. But the children who survive will be healthier, not just in childhood, but in adulthood. They will get more education. If you're healthier, you get more education. They will commit fewer crimes. They will earn more as adults. They will not only be healthier as adults, they will live longer. And we kind of knew that for a long time from just the association of, and when we look at data, either cross-sectional or longitudinal, that follow the children over time. But if you just look at a cross-section, you find that children who live with poor parents, grow up with poor parents, are more likely to be unhealthy, more likely to commit crime, less likely to get education, earn less as adults. But that kind of evidence isn't causal. It's not an experiment. And you can think of lots of reasons besides income that might affect the children's outcome that are correlated with income, like more education. The parents who are more educated will know how to make their children healthier. Also, they can inherit better health from their parents. But in the last 15 years, we have had natural experiment research that is causal. And the biggest source of the studies we use is from food stamp program. Also from the earned income tax credit, and also one of my favorite studies goes back to mothers' pensions, which was a cash program, state program, the forerunner of the aid to families with dependent children in the early 20th century. And there's a natural experiment there, which I won't describe. But I want to describe briefly the food stamp because that's more recent. And food stamps started as a demonstration program in a few counties. It wasn't until 1965, it wasn't until 1972 that all counties were required to adopt food stamp programs. By then, I think a third had already adopted it. Between 72 and 74, which is the counties could wait till 74, the rest of the counties adopted food stamps. And economists have been quite clever, and actually sociologists now have used the data. But you've got a natural experiment because of census data. You can look at for males, it's easy. Unfortunately, females change their names when they get married. So it's not sexist, it's just the data. We followed the males, but we have other data that tell us the same thing happens to females. And if you go and you look at census data for the year before, or 2 years or 3 years before food stamps was enacted, then you can look at after food stamps is enacted, and it's staggered by county. So you have before, after, and you have cross-county comparisons. And David Card was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work on natural experiments. So this is pretty good, and we use only natural experiment evidence. So now I'm going to show you the outcome of what we did. I'm skipping right to the final stage. And I want to say one more thing before I go into details. So you have to not only estimate the impacts, which is done from these natural experiments, you also, except for earnings, need to value the benefits in dollar terms. So earnings, childhood earnings, are measured in dollar terms, but health, it's not measured in dollar terms. You can measure how much healthier people are, but what's it worth in dollar terms? Same with crime. What's it worth in dollar terms? So you need to value those benefits. And economists have spent a lot of time figuring out how to value those benefits. I promised you I wouldn't go into detail about how they do it. It boggles the mind, but it's scientifically sound, and economists debate about that, but there's a consensus on it. So now let me point to a few things. And I want to begin with the bottom line. How productive is this investment in child allowances? And I should back up to say that the tax credit that we had excluded the poorest third of children. And the 1 year we extended, we made that tax credit refundable, and that's converted into a child allowance. So the cost, the first line, the first row here, is the cost of that, doing that. $97 billion. Not cheap. But now go to the bottom line of social benefits and look at the last column. That's social benefits. That's the benefits to everyone in society, including not just the direct beneficiaries, but also taxpayers. And if you look at the first row, the social cost is not measured by the transfer, the child allowance. It costs the taxpayer $97 billion, but the beneficiaries get $97 billion. And they count every bit as much as a taxpayer. Everyone counts. Every person is valued equally. So, and that's not to say that the cost of transfers is zero. There are administrative costs, that's lower, but those are really small. The biggest cost is the tax distortion that comes from taxation. All taxes distort behavior, and those costs, economists have a way of measuring it, and the estimates are 30% to 50% of the transfer cost. That's big. And we use the middle 40%. And that's excess burden for taxpayers. That's the last row. So the reason that's positive, not negative, is because you have to count not only the initial costs, but future costs. And you'll see in a moment that future costs are reduced. And I'll give you a hint. Why are they reduced? Because if I earn more, I pay more taxes. That's the biggest item. So, but now look at the bottom line. Take you back to the bottom line. $929 billion. So those are the total social benefits that come from this $97 billion. So almost 10 times bigger than the initial fiscal cost. Keep that ratio in mind. Almost 10 to 1. Almost 10 to 1. That's a pretty good investment. That's big. Now, remember I said it begins with health? So low birth weight, down, neonatal mortality down. But the biggest thing is child health up. That's $420 billion. That's almost half. the total social benefits. So it begins with health, and health, the improvement in health generates these other benefits, including education. I already mentioned low birth weight. Notice they don't appear in the table. Increased education, which we have lots of evidence that these programs increase education. So why did I leave it out of the table? Because the single biggest benefit of increased education is increased earnings. And we've already counted that, so we can't count it twice. Same with low birth weight. We've already counted better health for the children, so we can't count it. Okay, better health leads to lower healthcare expenditures as well, and also leads to longevity. But the biggest single benefit is just the children, their better health in childhood and their better health in adulthood. Why is it so big? Because the impact is big, and because we as human beings put healthcare is health, not healthcare. Health is worth a lot to us. And you combine a big impact, and it's very valuable, and you get $420 billion of benefits. So I mentioned earnings. This shows you the children are, once they begin working as adults, they earn $200 billion more than they would if it hadn't been for the program. And that leads to 57 billion in increased taxes. That's almost as much as the 97 billion all by itself. And there are some other monetary benefits for taxpayers as well. But the biggest benefit for taxpayers is the reduction in crime. And that has two components. One is if you have fewer crimes, you need fewer police, you need fewer jails, you need fewer judges. That's the easy part. But the more important part, which is more difficult, is the victim costs of crime. So if someone assaults you, that's pretty costly to you, the victim. And that's very valuable to avoid that. And economists have spent a lot of time in measuring how big that is. Assault is the biggest benefit aside from death. Murder is the biggest, but murder is rare. Assaults are also more rare than robbery. So rape is the most expensive. A rape jury awards and other ways of measuring what's the cost of a rape puts it at $500,000. But again, that's rare compared to robbery. Robbery is way more common, but is only worth about $25,000 for robbery. So, but all of these add up, and the victim costs are close to 3/4 of this total of $326 billion. So I want to conclude. Whoops. I want to conclude with this last slide to talk about cash and near cash transfers are an internal investment and internal improvement. And the Whig Party, that was their fundamental plank in their platform, was to make internal investments. And what they meant by that was roads, bridges, ports, etc. And they called it internal improvements because it was internal to the country. But you can think of education and healthcare as, in some ways, even more of an internal improvement because it's an investment in us. It's internal to us as human beings. And we have tons of evidence, and economists of all ideological stripes are agreed that education, especially elementary and secondary education, is a phenomenally productive investment. It's a great internal improvement. We now have evidence on medical care as well. Again, a great internal improvement. And if you asked me 10, 15 years ago that I believe cash transfers were in the same league as education and healthcare, I would have said no. I think that it's likely to be productive, but I have to say, 9 to 10 times social benefits, 9 to 10 times the initial cash expenditure puts cash in the same league as education and healthcare. So there's no other way. And I wrote such a, I didn't just say it, I wrote it that I didn't think it would be as productive. Well, you can't be right every time. So, thank you.